So, due to my unabashed love of Fire Country, I have been silently creating an army of minions who also watch the show. My mom did not intend to create like this walking billboard for Edgewater when she introduced me to Fire Country, but here we are. One of the friends I haven't quite been able to convince to watch the show is Brad, the person who inspired the kingdom metaphor in my introductory essay. You see, Brad is a fan of all things prestige, so not only is he way too cool for Taylor Swift, he can give you an entire rundown on why Better Call Saul is one of the best shows on TV that will almost make you forget how just insanely boring that show is. Brad is extremely skeptical of network TV. In fact, when I told him about this essay series, he told me I was reading too much into it. And I get it, on its surface, with its marketing, Fire Country is intended to be a firefighting procedural, CBS's answer to Chicago Fire on NBC and the 911 franchise on ABC. I cannot tell you how many people complain that Fire Country isn't just Chicago Fire on Friday night. And again, I get it. I have memories of watching Monk with my grandma and brother while we waited for my mom to get home. I think a big part of why Psych, a show about an immature crime-fighting duo with endless 80s references, was so popular is because it's basically Monk's format but repackaged. I don't really consider Monk or Psych to be my favorite shows though. That's more along the lines of House of Cards, Breaking Bad, NBC's Hannibal, and House MD, with only House being a procedural. That's not to say I haven't fallen in love with procedurals in the past. I've binged Monk, Psych, The Good Doctor, and Law & Order SVU at different times in my life. The fact that Michael Trucco guest stars in several of these shows has nothing to do with my enjoyment of the character Luke, I promise. It seems like every other year I say, this is it. This is my year that I get back into Law & Order SVU, watch one episode, and then 6 months later realize that I'm still paying for the ad-free version of Peacock, and I may have deleted the app already. But when it comes to Fire Country, I didn't feel that way. I don't feel that way. Yeah, sure, I binged the whole show in a week, but I don't think I've binged anything that quickly since Breaking Bad, and that was after I watched a film theory about how Walter White isn't really dead, and that theory was disproven recently by the Better Call Saul finale. It's still recently, if it was a couple years ago. Oh well. Fire Country sits in this weird space. It's a show where I can just say, Mom, let's watch the episode where they fight a fire at Ren Fair, and we can watch it without me having to give a 5-minute explanation of where we're at in the series. But my excitement isn't just, I can't wait until we see more fires. I really hope that they bring Michael Trucco back and give him the maximum number of episodes that SAG-AFTRA will allow before they have to promote him to a series regular, so that I can enjoy Luke's storylines all season. And, I love Fire Country enough to have a full-time job and also work full-time on this video essay series. Maybe it's because the show has so many plot lines, so many other things, that it's not really about the rescues. I'm tuning in for the plot lines. And maybe that's because Fire Country isn't a procedural. Now, I know that is a wild take. What is a procedural if not a show in which a case, whether a fire, illness, murder, whatever, is introduced and solved within a single episode? That's what Fire Country is. They get called in to fight a fire or rescue a victim from a car accident, and with a few exceptions, we always have the case wrapped up neatly in that 44-minute time slot. But they don't wrap up in 44 minutes, more like 20 to 30 minutes. Fire Country doesn't have a cold open like most procedurals. It has a first act, and at the end of that first act, we get interrupted to go to work. We almost never know how the fire started, and we rarely learn anything about the victims. We get called in when Cal Fire gets called in, and we start the rescue after Incident Command hands out orders. Love it or hate it, the personal drama on the show takes up just as much, if not more, time than the rescues. The rescue serves both as a reason our main characters cannot solve their own personal problems and a way for us, the audience, to hear them work through their problem or to see the consequences of the personal drama. Let's look at the season 3 episode Fire and Ice. It's a great example of this. During the rescue, the crews go out to work the scene of a malfunctioning ski lift which has dumped civilians all over a snow-covered mountain. Prior to going out to this rescue, Sharon and Bodhi had a massive fight about Sharon's backroom deal with Exalta International Holdings. Sharon sees it as having gotten the money to clean up 3 Rock and compensate the guys for their suffering. Bodhi sees it as silencing the inmates and the fight between Bodhi and Sharon is so loud it draws a crowd. Jake tells Sharon to knock it off, and she reminds him that she is the boss. Later on in the rescue, she shoots down Bodhi's plan, and Jake goes ahead with it anyway, getting himself suspended as a result. As Sharon writes up his suspension, he's still disrespectful towards her. He even gets the last word. Vince isn't in on this rescue. He's off being gaslit into visiting Walter at a nursing home by Noah. Joking aside, I get to pick my own examples, and short of proving that this is the case in all 52 episodes, me picking one single episode, Fire and Ice, and one single storyline, Jake and Sharon not getting along, doesn't disprove Fire Country as a procedural. I mean, theoretically, I suppose you could do all of this fantastic plot and character work in a procedural. That being said, I don't know about you, but I have very little information about how firefighting actually works in the Fire Country universe. Not to constantly reference my fan fiction, but I had to watch YouTube videos of car extractions to be able to write that scene in my fan fiction. Okay, quick question. Which one of these is a McLeod? Wrong. The one on the left is a Halligan and the one on the right is a Pulowski. This is a McLeod. But did you notice all three of these pictures are from the show? Gabs uses a McLeod to cut line in the pilot. Vince picking up a Halligan is how he gets electrocuted in season 2, and when Sharon and Vince go to Buena Vista, they take Pulowski's with them. The fire jargon is there, it feels authentic, but we don't get a one-on-one session on what these words mean. That's not to say there aren't things that we've learned about firefighting, like understanding how a line will stop the fire dead in its tracks if cut right, the scarcity of water as a resource, and that you have to have multiple lines of attack against a fire. In contrast, when you watch a show like SVU, you know what the job of CSI is when they show up. You know that DNA is individual to each person unless they have an identical twin, and that a police officer had better not arrest someone unless they have a warrant, or not if the person is caught in the act. But these aren't just facts, they're shorthand for the story. If CSI are on the scene, it means that it's been long enough that the scene has already been processed. By the time we get to hear about DNA, or lack thereof, we are well into the investigation phase, and when it's time to get a warrant, that means someone is going down. But Fire Country? I could tell you that when they get there, Eve or Manny are going to tell Three Rock to cut a certain length of line with a certain scrape. I can tell you that Vince is going to tell people to run a hose and that Jake is going to be on that hose, but I don't know what any of that means because, you see, fires are not the story in Fire Country. Firefighting is the job that our characters do. Sometimes the fire forces whatever conflict is going on to take a pause. Other times it escalates tensions between two people who aren't getting along, or it forces two people who've been quarreling to work together. When Sharon says this fire is at 60% containment, I have no clue what that means. I just know it's time to roll up. So to me, when you put these two things together, the character-based storytelling and the meaninglessness of the actual procedure, you get serialized storytelling with a fun rescue in each episode. And as someone who loves movies that mix both, like The Dark Knight, and hates movies that lean way too much into the action, like Indiana Jones, it's basically the author bait. You guys do not understand how much I wanted to enjoy Better Call Saul. I wanted to see what Vince Gilligan would do after 5 years of Breaking Bad's showrunner under his belt. I just needed that excitement to break up the plot, and Fire Country gives me both. Now, I realize that I've spent like half of this video proving Fire Country is not a procedural, which I said I would do in the title, and like 0 time proving that it's serialized storytelling, much less prestige. That prestige part is what I'm hoping you'll see over the course of the next 20 essays. But you know, Phineas and Ferb is not a procedural. I didn't learn how to build a roller coaster or a time machine, much less a papier-mâché airplane, but it isn't serialized storytelling. You could put on any 2 episodes back to back without missing much, but try putting on the episode Get Some Be Safe and then it's not over. You'll be like, what the fuck? Why is Luke in charge now? If you really want to have fun, try watching Bad Guy and then The Leone Way back to back and be like, what the actual fuck? Why is she flirting with him? Did she decide to sleep with him after all? To be fair, Fire Country has a lot of episodes for a serialized show. Most seasons of Breaking Bad had 13 episodes in a season, so did Hannibal and House of Cards. But Fire Country Season 1 has 22 episodes. Seasons 3 and 4 are 20 episodes each, and while Season 2 did end up being 10 episodes, that was because of the writer's strike. It can be a lot to ask audiences to track plot developments across 22 episodes. But Fire Country doesn't ask its audience to track plot lines over 22 episodes. It doesn't have just one storyline per season. Yes, season 1 is broadly about Bodhi earning parole and then losing it in the last episode. Yes, season 2 is broadly about Bodhi earning freedom, and season 3 is broadly about Bodhi learning to fight fires as a free man. These feel like they're building towards something, but since we're just in season 3, I can't exactly say what. Within each season, what we actually see are 3 plot storylines which line up with 3 character storylines for each of our characters. Those storylines are the growth that builds up to the choices that our characters make in the final episode of the season, the final episode of that last arc. Season 1 starts out with the Bodhi is back arc. This arc is the longest, encompassing 9 episodes. It establishes our main characters and ends with investigating the loss of Meg, the patient Gabriella fails to save. Bodhi saves Gabs' job by saying he treated Meg, then Vince sharing about his mistakes the night Riley died keeps Bodhi out of prison. Next we transition into the kidney arc, which takes place from the episode Get Your Hopes Up through My Kinda Leader, and we end with the Drugs at Camp arc, which takes place from the episode A Cry for Help through I Know It Seems Impossible. I know you're thinking, wow, did you really split the 2 arson episodes into 2 different arcs? Yeah, I know. Season 1 does a good job of braiding these arcs together. In fact, that's why I had a hard time pinning down exactly where the arcs landed. I went back and forth as to whether Get Your Hopes Up belonged in the Bodhi is Back arc or the Kidney arc, but let me walk you through the Drugs at Camp arc backwards, starting with Bodhi ending up in prison after being framed for dealing drugs, so you can see why I think that these 2 episodes are actually in 2 different arcs. Bodhi ends up in prison because he was framed for dealing drugs, but also because Sharon refused to use her powers to get him out. She said no because she already did this at the beginning of the season, and she fears that she taught Bodhi Mom can erase all consequences. But it was Vince who asked her to do this, not Bodhi. You see, the day before, Sharon and Vince are having a conversation about Bodhi's failed drug test, wherein Vince says that he needs Bodhi to be telling the truth that he's clean, and Sharon warns Vince that this kind of language sounds like what Walter would say. Vince's similarities to his abusive father were already on Vince's mind due to Vince being forced to have a conversation with Walter by Luke. After that conversation, Vince goes to Jake to apologize for not loving Jake or Vince's other kids enough when they got into trouble. What was the trouble that Vince thought was stopping him from loving Jake? The accusation that Jake committed serial arson, and while those arsons do take place in the kidney arc, so does the first half of the investigation. The idea of Jake being guilty of serial arson really isn't planted in our mind until the end of the Smokey scene at the end of My Kinda Leader. So even though the arson episodes are My Kinda Leader and A Cry for Help, I really feel like these 2 episodes are split up in the arcs. Not to spoil Vince's character essay, but if you want to work it the other way around, you can do that too. The comment to Vince by federal wildlands firefighter Paul Knox about Bodhi being a good kid is the conclusion of Vince's storyline about how he made Bodhi feel like he wasn't worthy of Cal Fire. Knox had held a 20-year grudge against Vince for calling a retreat on a fire the 2 had worked together decades ago, and in My Kinda Leader, Bodhi convinces Knox that sometimes retreat is the honorable call. Season 3 works the same way. There are 3 really clear arcs. The first 7 episodes are the training arc, wherein Luke agrees, with Sharon's persuasion, to get Bodhi into the Edgewater training program, and we finish at his graduation. The next 6 episodes are what I call the new normal arc, wherein we're meant to be enjoying Bodhi finally reaching his goal, but in actuality, he gets on 2 calls with Vince, and they fight for a good chunk of one of them, because Walter in his dementia kind of just dominates everyone's minds even when he isn't on the scene. And then in the last arc of season 3, I finally call it This Is Why Vince Didn't Want Luke to Leave, since it starts right after Luke leaves to go to Japan and all hell breaks loose, including Vince dying. Season 2 is a little harder to break down. It was originally 20 episodes, sliced down to 10. I mean, if I squint hard enough, I could see 2, 3, or 4 arcs. I don't know exactly how they're supposed to be broken down, but lately I've been leaning towards it having 2 arcs, a pre-escape arc and a post-escape arc, cutting it right down the middle with 1 through 5 in arc 1 and 6 through 10 in arc 2. This works for most of the storylines, but there are a handful, like Sharon and Bodhi's personal storylines, that don't split well at that halfway mark. To me, though, This is really the best evidence of Fire Country not being a procedural. Serialized storytelling goes through arcs, and character storylines don't just exist to give us a B plot and a C plot, but to further the growth, to make us go, Sharon in the pilot would never do that, but Sharon in the season finale certainly would. And speaking of that finale, I think serialization is really the key here. We have to map out these character arcs across the first 21 episodes so that we can see why the characters make the choices that they make in that final episode. So I want to talk about just how it is that I'm going to map out these arcs across the season so we can view that final 5 minutes of I Know It Seems Impossible in this new serialized TV light. But really, what I'm going to need to do is break down the entire Drugs at Camp arc to start from A Cry for Help and finish with the finale. I'm going to need to take 3 essays, each one covering 2 episodes to get that done and to show how the character arcs are tested, and then we'll see the results through everyone's actions in that room. So those 3, plus the 3 I've already done, makes 6 out of the 23 episodes. Well, what about the rest? I'm going to have 13 character essays. 13? I hear you cry. How? We only have 7 main characters. And the answer to that is simple. I plan to do 1 essay each about Bodhi, Riley, Walter, Eve, Jake, Gabs, and Manny. Then I'm going to do 2 essays each on Sharon, Vince, and Luke. Yes, I realize that means I am giving Luke, who has been in 13 episodes as of the end of season 3, twice as many essays as Bodhi. Give me a second to explain myself. What I'm really going to be doing here is 2 different things in each character essay. First, I'm going to be explaining how the character works. What is the big important thing about them that you need to know? The second thing I'm going to be doing is showing how the character storyline goes in both the Bodhi is back arc and the kidney donation arc. What change has already been undergone by the time we get to the Drugs at Camp arc. But for Vince, Luke, and Sharon, I'm going to need to split these essays in half. You see, there are still 4 more essays, 1 each about Edgewater, Station 42, and 3 Rock. Then there's going to be a finale. So the part 1's for Vince, Sharon, and Luke, the part that talks about how their character work, those are going to go in with the character essays. But their part 2's, the one that talks about their storyline, that's going to have to be after the essays about the places. Then we're going to see how all of this storytelling comes together through the Drugs at Camp arc, and I've got a really fun essay planned for the finale. In addition to these 23 episodes, there's also going to be 2 bonus essays, one on Christmas and one on New Year's Day. The one on Christmas is going to be going over all the subtext that Vince might be bisexual, and there's a lot, and the one on New Year's Day is going to be going over the complicated mess that is Luke and Sharon's relationship. Neither one of these are season 1 essays. They really pull a lot from seasons 2 and 3, but it felt weird to leave them for the summer hiatus when I'm going to do some lighter topics like Freddie and Rebecca while I work on my season 2 deep dive.